The air tasted like desperation, thick and hot, clinging to the skin like a shroud woven from dust and exhausted expectation. Peter felt it most keenly, the bone-deep ache that wasn't just physical weariness from a day spent pressed against the chaotic, grasping crowd, but the heavy, crushing weight of leadership he hadn't asked for and frankly, often felt entirely unqualified to handle. They had been teaching all day, a steady stream of parables spilling forth from the master, stories of seeds and soil, sheep and shepherds, and every word, every whisper of hope, seemed to drain the physical energy right out of Peter's stout frame, leaving only a frayed bundle of nerves beneath his calloused exterior. He looked at Jesus, sitting quietly in the stern of the boat, not yet asleep, but resting with an astonishing stillness that seemed utterly alien to the frantic energy that perpetually characterized Peter's own spirit. This man, Jesus, had spent more energy, absorbed more human misery and doubt than all of them combined, yet carried a tranquility that Peter would have traded his finest fishing nets for. Peter's inner life was a relentless storm, even on the brightest day, a churning whirlpool of worry about the past debts, the future provisions, the safety of his family, the sheer impossibility of the mission they were now embarked upon. They were running on fumes, seeking a moment of respite across the Sea of Galilee, heading towards the Gentile country, away from the immediate crush of the Jewish towns. The decision to cross seemed born of necessity, a simple calculation of logistics and privacy. Peter watched the sun dip behind the hills of Gadara, casting the lake in hues of blood orange and brooding violet. He hated crossing at dusk. The sea, known locally as Gennesaret, was infamous for its capriciousness. A great, sunken bowl surrounded by steep gorges that trapped and funneled the wind with lethal unpredictability. Yet, Jesus had commanded it. Let us go over to the other side. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a quiet, firm decree. As they pushed off from the shore, the scent of fresh water mingled with the earthy smell of fish and old wood. Peter felt a prickle of familiar anxiety, not yet warranted by the conditions, but always present, like a low, chronic hum in the background of his soul. He looked back at the receding shore, a chaotic world they were leaving behind, hoping that the physical distance would somehow create mental space, failing to realize that the most violent storms they faced, they carried within them. The boat slipped into the deepening twilight, a small, dark shell swallowed by the vast, silent water. The air was unnaturally still now, the kind of stillness that veteran sailors like Peter and Andrew instantly distrusted. It felt heavy, muggy, holding its breath. Jesus, having laid his head upon the cushion in the stern, was already profoundly asleep. It was the sleep of utter faith, the absolute surrender that comes only when one is fully certain that the universe operates entirely outside of one's own control, yet perfectly within the Father's. Peter, however, found no such surrender. His mind, unburdened by immediate tasks, immediately turned inward, conjuring anxieties out of the smooth water. He saw the debts he owed, magnified in the dark surface of the lake. He saw the faces of the Pharisees, their eyes sharp with suspicion, their legalistic traps already sprung in his memory. He worried about the sheer magnitude of the task ahead. How could 12 uneducated fishermen possibly change the world? It was an internal, relentless cross-examination, an exhausting monologue of doubt that robbed him of any chance of rest. He found himself envying the master's peace, a peace so complete it seemed impossible. John and James were busy adjusting the single, small sail, whispering about the day's teaching. They spoke of the mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds, yet growing into the greatest of herbs. Peter thought grimly that his faith felt smaller than the seed's dust, incapable of sprouting anything but thorns of worry. The lake was deceptive. Framed by the high slopes of the Golan Heights to the east and the hills of Galilee to the west, it acted like a colossal venturi tube. A sudden thermal change could whip up a monstrous wind in mere minutes, and they all knew it. Peter squinted at the horizon. A black line, sharp and unnaturally defined, was rising fast above the eastern ridge. It wasn't just cloud cover. It was a visible wall of approaching atmospheric violence. He cleared his throat, trying to sound casual, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Andrew, pull the sail down. We might be in for a squall. This is coming on too fast to risk it. They began to work methodically, their movements precise and practiced, born of decades spent battling this very body of water. But even as they hauled the sodden canvas, the air temperature dropped precipitously, the comfortable humidity instantly replaced by a sharp, icy bite. The gentle rocking of the boat ceased, replaced by a sudden, jarring slam as the first wave, entirely out of context with the calm seconds before, hit the starboard side with brutal force. The silence was officially broken, replaced now by the escalating symphony of trouble. The storm did not build. It simply arrived. It was as if a massive, invisible hand had reached down from the heights and scooped the wind, slamming it directly onto the surface of the lake. The first gust felt like a physical blow, tearing at the men's hair and clothes, snapping the mast like a whip, forcing the boat immediately into a near-vertical tilt. Within seconds, the placid dark water transformed into a chaotic landscape of towering, phosphorescent whitecaps. The noise was overwhelming, a shrieking, tearing roar that annihilated speech and thought alike. Peter, the seasoned fisherman, was immediately thrown back onto his instincts, yelling commands that were instantly lost in the din, his heart rate skyrocketing from the physical effort of fighting the rudder. He was trying to steer the heavy vessel into the waves, attempting to prevent them from broadsiding the craft and capsizing them instantly, a professional maneuver he had executed countless times. But this storm felt different, malignant, almost supernatural in its sudden, focused intensity. This was not merely bad weather. It was chaos personified, an engine of destruction specifically targeting their little wooden shell. Wave after wave broke over the bow, not spraying, but dumping gallons of frigid water directly into the vessel. The bailers were immediately deployed, the disciples working frantically, scooping water and tossing it back over the side. But for every cup they emptied, 10 more sloshed in. The internal anxiety that usually haunted Peter's quiet moments now found its perfect external manifestation. The physical chaos mirrored the fear in his gut, uncontrollable, suffocating, deafening. He screamed at James to secure the gear, but James could only point helplessly at the churning black foam now rising rapidly toward their knees. They were drowning, not incrementally, but with horrifying speed. In this moment of peak primal fear, all the theology and all the parables melted away, leaving only the raw, urgent desperation to survive. Peter glanced involuntarily toward the stern, where, amidst this apocalyptic pandemonium, Jesus lay entirely undisturbed. The contrast was a slap in the face. How could any human being sleep through this? How could he remain so utterly detached from the catastrophe unfolding around them? It was infuriating, baffling, and deeply frightening. The noise and the water worked together to strip away all rational thought, leaving them prey to the deepest human panic, the certainty of imminent, pointless death. The boat was now wallowing, heavy with the weight of the encroaching sea. Every time the hull dropped into a trough between the immense waves, it felt like plummeting into an abyss, followed by a violent upward lurch that threatened to shatter their bones. The disciples were no longer functioning as a cohesive unit. They were 9 separate islands of pure terror, each man fighting for his life, gasping for breath, spitting salt water, his eyes wide and fixed on the encroaching disaster. The storm wasn't just physical. It was auditory warfare, designed to silence the voice of reason and amplify the voice of dread. The roar of the wind, the crash of the waves against the planks, the sloshing of the water inside the boat. It was a cacophony that convinced the mind that all hope was gone. Peter, his arms aching, his clothes soaked through, felt the exhaustion return. But this time it was mixed with a cold, paralyzing dread that went deeper than physical fatigue. He remembered the debts, the mission, the promise of a new kingdom, and it all seemed ludicrous, a fool's errand that was about to end in a murky grave. His lifelong experience on this lake told him they had passed the point of no return. Their skill, their strength, their knowledge of the water, none of it mattered against this overwhelming force. They were entirely, devastatingly helpless. The psychological weight of that helplessness was worse than the cold water. It was the realization that everything he valued, everything he had worked for, was subject to the random, merciless fury of a natural phenomenon, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, he could do to stop it. He looked back at Jesus again, the man who had healed the sick, cast out demons, and taught with unprecedented authority, yet now lay utterly oblivious to the fact that they were mere minutes from being consumed by the depths. His peaceful form became a focus for Peter's spiraling anxiety. It wasn't just fear of the storm. It was the raw human frustration that the source of all their hope was simply sleeping when they needed him most. The accusation began to form, sharp and bitter, in the back of his throat. He doesn't care. He doesn't see. The weight of his anxiety, the accumulated worry of years, boiled up into a frantic, physical need for intervention, an absolute demand that the quiet peace he possessed should be shared, or at least used to save them from the impending doom. The water was now up to their knees, cold, heavy, and insistent. The boat was dangerously close to foundering. One particularly immense wave crashed over the stern, submerging the small area where Jesus lay. Peter watched as the water washed over the master's face, yet he still did not stir. This final inundation was the breaking point. The disciples ceased bailing. They dropped their ropes and their buckets, realizing the futility of their labor. Their panic curdled into a desperate, furious need for attention. They surged toward the stern, Peter leading the charge, his voice finally cutting through the din, strained and raw with accusation. He shook Jesus hard, roughly interrupting the profound, inexplicable rest. "Master!" he screamed, the word torn from his lungs. "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Do you not see this?" The question was laden with all the accumulated anxieties of the journey, all the hidden fears about the future and the present catastrophe. It was the primal cry of humanity facing annihilation, questioning why the divine seems so absent, so asleep, in the face of suffering. Jesus slowly opened his eyes. He did not leap up in panic, nor did he seem startled. His gaze, calm and fully present, moved from Peter's frantic, accusing face to the sheer, terrifying violence of the storm surrounding them. The transition from deep slumber to absolute wakefulness was instantaneous, frightening in its lack of human inertia. He took in the sinking boat, the towering waves, the drenched and terrified faces of his followers, and the shrieking wind, all in one long, silent moment. Now, consider your own lifeboat. Perhaps it isn't the physical sea that threatens you, but the crushing weight of financial insecurity, the sudden diagnosis, or the relentless, deafening noise of anxiety that tells you, hour by hour, that you are not safe. When your own lifeboat is filling with water, be it debt, despair, or the rising tide of fear, have you ever looked up at the heavens or perhaps at the sources of strength you once relied upon, and felt that same stinging accusation Peter voiced? Does anyone even see the chaos I'm facing? Tell us, in those moments of deep crisis, when you feel most unseen and unheard, what is the loudest voice in your head? Is it the voice of the storm, or is it a small, forgotten whisper of hope, buried deep beneath the noise? He stood, simply rising to his full height in the stern, utterly unimpressed by the forces raging around him. The answer to Peter's frantic accusation was not immediate reassurance, but an immediate, shocking demonstration of authority. The silence that followed the master's command was not the slow, gradual settling of a storm that had exhausted its fury. It was atomic, immediate, and terrifyingly absolute. Jesus raised his hand, not dramatically, but with a quiet, certain authority that suggested he was simply addressing a subordinate who had overstepped its bounds. He spoke two simple, ancient words into the teeth of the tempest: silence. Be still. The effect was not merely that the storm ceased, but that the very concept of motion and sound was instantly annihilated. The wind did not die down. It vanished. The waves did not gradually lessen. They instantly flattened into a glassy, still surface that mirrored the dark clouds above. The raging foam turned instantly to slick, quiescent water. One moment, they were being tossed through a maelstrom of destruction, deafened by the roar. The next, They were adrift on a body of water so calm it seemed to defy physics, wrapped in a profound silence that pressed in on their eardrums, far heavier and more unsettling than the storm's noise. Water dripped from the sodden disciples, and the sound of those drops hitting the waterlogged planks was now painfully loud. Their ears strained, waiting for the inevitable returning gust, the sound of the wave cresting, the continued howl of the wind, but there was nothing. Only the perfect, flawless stillness. The shock was physical. Peter, standing inches from Jesus, who was now utterly dry save for the water that had washed over him moments before, felt his terror transmute from fear of drowning into a bewildering spiritual dread. The sheer power required to instantly halt the forces of nature was beyond human comprehension. This was not a fisherman navigating a gale or a magician performing a trick. This was the sovereignty of creation made manifest. The boat, heavy with water, bobbed gently on the now placid surface. The disciples stood frozen, drenched, shivering, not from the cold, but from the sudden, unbearable weight of the knowledge that they were in the presence of something far greater and more terrifying than the storm they had just escaped. They had accused him of not caring. He had answered by demonstrating that he was the very Lord of the elements, the master of the chaos that governed their anxious lives. The disciples did not speak for what felt like an eternity, only the soft sound of their labored breathing and the gentle sloshing of water inside the hull disturbing the supernatural quiet. The terror they had faced in the tempest was raw and visceral, the fear of physical death. But the fear that now gripped them was a holy dread, the realization of the absolute, incomprehensible power residing in the man who stood calmly before them. It was a fear that pierced the soul, questioning the entire framework of their reality. They exchanged looks. Peter, Andrew, John, James, their eyes wide with confusion and utter awe. Peter finally whispered, the sound barely audible in the stillness, echoing the thoughts of all of them. Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? The implications were devastatingly clear to the seasoned fishermen. The sea and the wind were forces of nature controlled only by God himself, according to the ancient teachings. The Creator spoke to his creation, and it yielded instantly. If Jesus commanded the chaos to cease, and the chaos instantly submitted, what did that make him? And more immediately, what did that make them dash? The men who had just angrily shaken this being awake, demanding that he tend to their comfort, their physical relief at being saved was completely overshadowed by the sheer, profound embarrassment and terror of having panicked in the presence of such effortless, world-altering authority. They had trusted in their own skills, then they had surrendered to despair, and finally, they had lashed out in accusation. Through it all, the answer had been sleeping quietly right beside them. Jesus turned slowly from the placid water back to his disciples, his expression not one of anger, but of deep, penetrating disappointment. He had saved them from the external storm only to address the far more dangerous tempest raging within their own hearts. He knew they were still reeling from the physical miracle, yet he bypassed the immediate awe to strike at the core psychological failure. Jesus did not comment on the miracle he had just performed. He didn't boast of his power over the elements. Instead, he focused entirely on the internal state of the men. "Why are you so fearful?" he asked, his voice calm, cutting through the heavy silence like a razor blade. "How is it that you have no faith?" His question was a direct, psychological assessment, not of their seamanship, but of their souls. He wasn't asking why they were wet or why they had difficulty bailing water. He was asking why, after witnessing his power in teaching, healing, and confronting evil, they had reverted instantly to absolute panic the moment their immediate physical comfort was threatened. This was the true shock of the encounter. Jesus wasn't interested in the external chaos. He was interested in the chaotic response it had generated within them. He was pointing out that their real problem wasn't the size of the waves, but the absence of trust that had allowed the storm to take root in their minds, paralyzing them into despair and accusation. The storm itself was merely a test, a mirror reflecting the hidden landscape of their anxieties. Peter felt a wave of shame wash over him, colder than the seawater. He realized the depth of his anxiety, the ingrained habit of his mind to immediately jump to the worst-case scenario, to assume disaster, and to believe that safety depended entirely on his own strenuous efforts. Jesus' quiet sleep had been the ultimate expression of faith, the certainty that even if the boat sank, the purpose of God would not. His sleep was a demonstration that worry is often a form of blasphemy, a subconscious belief that the universe is governed by blind chance rather than divine intention. The disciples had been so focused on the uncontrollable variable, the wind and the waves, that they had completely forgotten the constant factor, the unwavering presence of the Master. Their fear was a measure of how much they relied on the visible, the temporal, and how little they trusted the invisible, the eternal. This deep realization was the real miracle that night, the instant cessation of the internal, self-generated storm of doubt and desperation, exposed and rebuked by the very source of peace. The journey resumed, strangely quiet, strangely introspective. The men handled the oars mechanically, no longer rushing, but moving with a newfound, almost reverent caution. The air itself felt hallowed. The physical danger had passed, but the spiritual lesson was just beginning to sink in. Jesus' sleep was the key they had missed. It was not exhaustion. It was a profound act of theological trust. It symbolized the absolute spiritual rest available to those who truly surrender their outcomes to the Father. He rested because his identity was rooted in something unshakable, something that the temporary, furious chaos of nature could not touch. Peter, watching the Master in the low light, began to dissect his own lifetime of worry. His anxiety had always been the engine of his life, the driving force to work harder, to secure the future, to compensate for potential failure. But Jesus' existence demonstrated that such anxiety was ultimately futile, a heavy chain that bound the soul. The storm had proven that there is a level of chaos in life that no amount of human effort, skill, or worry can mitigate. You cannot outbail a tsunami. Yet, when confronted with that ultimate helplessness, they had still chosen panic over peace, desperation over trust. The lesson was fundamentally psychological. Anxiety is the soul's reaction to believing that it has been made the ultimate captain of its own fate, responsible for controlling every variable, visible and invisible. And when the variables become uncontrollable, as they always eventually do, the soul descends into despair. Jesus was offering not just rescue, but a permanent paradigm shift. True security is not found in the absence of storms, but in the certainty that the one who commands the storms is present in the boat with you. This understanding didn't eliminate the threat of future storms, but it instantly defanged the paralyzing power of anxiety, proving that the chaos outside need never dictate the peace within. The boat finally nudged gently against the unfamiliar shore in the Gentile territory of the Gerasenes, the air here heavy with the scent of unfamiliar spices and distant livestock. The journey was over, but the experience was indelible. The disciples emerged from the boat, wet and shivering, but fundamentally altered. They had crossed more than just a body of water. They had crossed a threshold of understanding. They no longer saw Jesus merely as a powerful teacher or a great prophet. They had seen the Lord of creation, capable of instantly silencing not just the external storm, but the internal one that had plagued them for their entire lives. The profound peace Jesus demonstrated, first in his sleep and then in his command, was the antidote to the despair and anxiety that suffocates the human spirit. He had proven that controlling the chaos of life is possible, not through strenuous effort or worry, but through the simple, shocking act of absolute faith in the one who holds the elements in his hand. The great challenge, they realized, was not surviving the storm, but remembering that power when the next small wave of worry or financial stress or relational conflict inevitably arose. The fear of dying had been replaced by the awe of living under such immense, loving, and immediate authority. The shocking moment of that night, the abrupt shift from deafening fury to perfect silence, remained their anchor, a permanent testament to the fact that chaos is merely an illusion of power, easily dismissed by the voice of the divine. If this powerful story of confronting internal and external chaos resonated with the struggles you face today, reminding you that true peace is not the absence of trouble but the presence of trust, please subscribe to Shoreline Parables. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these ancient, healing stories of the Master's authority to a modern world desperately searching for solace and meaning. May the stillness of that ancient sea enter your heart, calming the storms within, today and always. Thank you for watching, and may your journey be filled with peace.